Today, we are going to be teaching you how to read town runs. So, what are town runs? Okay. So, when you hear someone or your legislator say, "Hey, can you get me a copy of the town runs?" Town runs is the shorthand term that we use referring to the breakdown of how much money each municipality is going to receive. Okay. So, that's that huge spreadsheet. And that is the formal document. When everyone is asking you for town runs, this is what they're asking for. So, what will you see in town runs? So, you're going to see a variety of pots of dollars, which will be listed at the top of the spreadsheet of the town runs. And those are the pots of funds that we allocate to municipalities. So, you will see payments in lieu of taxes, which is pilot funding. You'll see motor vehicle tax reimbursements. You'll see supplemental revenue sharing grants, Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan Fund grants, Town Aid Road, local capital improvements known as LOCIP, municipal grants and aid, education cost sharing, ECS, adult ed, and then a total that municipality is going to receive. So this is a very, very shortened and condensed version of what you see in the town runs. So as you see on the left, it is breaking down by municipality. And at the top, it is explaining the pot of funds, where the funding is coming from, and any policy changes. And you'll see the policy changes. Those are always kind of good to look at because right now we are doing tiered pilot. You don't need to understand the whole background, but it'll give you a brief explanation as why these numbers are changing. And same, especially with ECS. That is especially important because we are changing the funding and formula. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you the pots of the dollars. Okay, so most people are saying, well, what is pilot funds? First of all, your legislator will never say, hey, can you let me know how much I'm getting for payments in lieu of taxes? They will say, what are my pilot dollars? So basically, what they're saying is, how much is my municipality receiving from the state to make up the difference of tax exempt properties in that municipality? So for example, I live in Enfield. We have a lot of prisons. We get a lot of pilot funding compared to other places. You'll also see a lot of pilot funds in urban areas, especially because of colleges, nonprofits, and hospitals. So it's usually the smaller towns, rural areas, you won't see a lot of pilot unless they have an amazing amount of nonprofits. It's usually in the bigger pockets, as well as where you have prisons, that sort of stuff. So the motor vehicle tax reimbursement, you will see that I have this asterisk. Anything on this slide and the next means that not every municipality gets that money. So what is the motor vehicle tax reimbursement? 2 years ago, we capped the motor vehicle tax mill rate at 32.46 mils. Now you're probably saying, what does that even mean? So basically, there is a huge disparity in how municipalities are taxing various motor vehicles. I want to say in Waterbury right now, the mill rate's 67. But if you go to Ridgefield, the mill rate is 19. Guess who's paying less taxes? The wealthier districts. So this is something that we did that will allow districts that had a very high mill rate to keep the cap, and we are reimbursing the difference. Now, I say this because we don't have to reimburse this. This is something we've decided to do within policy. All right. So that doesn't, I don't know how long we're going to keep those reimbursements coming, but that is a policy decision that we made. The other one that you'll see is supplemental revenue sharing grants. This fund, if it's given to a municipality, is taken from the sales tax revenue, and it just goes to a variety of different state grants that we have. And we just have that big title of supplemental revenue sharing. You will also see Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan Fund money. These municipalities that receive this money, it is tax revenue collected from the casinos for municipalities who are on tribal land and designated towns by law. So for example, it's not just the 2 or 3 municipalities that have casinos. It's also the towns that are surrounding and have streets that are used for all the people visiting the casinos. This past session, we actually gave some money to East Windsor because there was a casino that did not ever open, but that property is vacant now. And so they went to the state and said, hey, listen, we want to get some funding too, because we're not doing anything with this property. And it was technically supposed to be a casino through Mohegan. So not every town gets that. It's also usually a lot of the more rural areas because of where the casinos are located. The next pot of funds all municipalities receive, and that's Town Aid Road. This is dollars that can be used for the municipality to construct, maintain, and renovate local roads, bridges, to do sanding, tree removal, basically any of that stuff to keep the road safe, right? Just to keep everything functioning. The next pot of funds is local capital improvements. This is actually bonding. Okay. On the on the town runs, you will see where it says LoSiP. Right under that, it says bonding. Okay. So if you have a legislator who says, oh, I'm supposed to get $50,000 in LoSiP, I'm not your person. It is Zoe. And for that purpose, it has to go through the whole bonding process, right? Like, so these are funds that the municipality can get, but it's got to be put on the bond commission agenda, voted, all that sort of stuff. It is not budgetary.
I would just like to add, it doesn't go through the legislator project request process. It just has to go through the state bond commission. And that's not something that legislators request outside of their project requests. It's just that is historically given to those municipalities listed in the town runs.
Yes. Okay. The other pot of funds you will see that not all municipalities receive is municipal grants and aid. This is again for extra funding sorts for the same sort of thing: snow removal, sanding, basically road safety of sorts. You can put in traffic lights, signs, all of that sort of stuff.
And then we get into the education part of the budget. So education cost sharing, that is the biggest form of municipal aid. We give more than $2 billion per year across all of our towns to help with their education funding. So towns are contributing to education funding. We also contribute, and there are some federal dollars too, but the bulk of it is state and town funding. This formula has been reworked many, many times. And in 2017, the legislature passed a much more equitable version. So essentially, if your town can afford to put more money into education, you get less from the state. And if you can put less money into education, you get more from the state, with the goal being a more equitable outcome for all of our students. So this formula has been gradually phased in for the last few years. And then in the fiscal year 2025. So not this upcoming school year, but the next one, or the current school year, I should say, we put another $150 million into it, with the goal of speeding up that phase in, so that instead of being a few years out from full funding, we should hit that in fiscal year 26. So that's a lofty goal, but we did put a lot of money into that this year to get schools more on that right track. And so you'll notice when you look at the town runs for education cost sharing, a lot of towns you'll see an increase, and some towns you'll see that it's flat. And that essentially means for this budget year that that town is overfunded according to our current formula. So rather than start decreasing them down to that appropriate amount, we've held them harmless for the next couple of years. So if you see flat funding, that means that town is considered overfunded, and they'll start seeing that decrease beginning in fiscal year 26 until fiscal year 32, when everybody should be at 100% funding. And this does get reevaluated every single year. I'm not going to go into every part of this formula because there are a lot of moving pieces. I did put this very great website up here. The School and State Finance Project has a ton of information about education funding. On this first page, you'll see things like a general explanation. It's also got all sorts of infographics, because the way we fund our local public schools is different than the way we fund charter schools and magnet schools. So all of that is explained in nice, accessible terms there. There's also an entire section on education cost sharing. It's got infographics. It's got all sorts of interactive tools you can use and mess around with, where you can say, okay, if I increase this part, what does that do to the funding? It's got history. It's really a fantastic resource. So if you want to learn more about all the different pieces of this formula and how we determine what this number is, definitely go to that website. It's really valuable. And so then the last piece is adult education, which is just the part that the state contributes to local districts so that they can provide things like GED and other forms of adult education.
Okay. So one of the most important things when you're looking at town runs, but also just understanding our budget package in general, is the difference between a calendar year and a fiscal year. So a calendar year is the 1 year period that we think of between January 1 and December 31. When we are talking about budgeting and fiscal years in the state of Connecticut, it's the 1 year period that we use to prepare for our financial reporting and budgeting. In Connecticut, that is July 1 to June 30th. So right now you'll see we are in calendar 2023, but we are in fiscal year 2024. As of July 1, 2023, we are now in fiscal year 24 all the way through June 30th, 2024. And then come July 1, we're in fiscal year 25. So in order to understand that and what we do with the town runs and budget, this is crucial. It might seem like it's very mundane. This is very crucial. And it's also different than the federal fiscal year, right? So right now, we need you to know our calendar year and our fiscal year.
So when you look at the town runs, you see those top headers where it explains each pot of dollars. Then you get below that to the actual numbers. And this is where the fiscal year part of that really becomes important. So you're going to see 5 columns And keep in mind that we do a biennial budget. So in our last session, we passed the budget for the next 2 years. Next year, we can adjust the budget for fiscal year 25. So when you see that number, it's not actually final yet. And you'll also see a big red disclaimer on every column that says none of these numbers are final because they still have to be worked out and made sure that they're exactly the right amount. The state agencies work with the towns to determine exactly how much they're getting. So it's never completely final. So just keep that in mind. So you'll see in the most recent town runs, you'll see fiscal year 23, and that's the most recent budget and what we ended up paying out on that year. You'll see fiscal year 24 and 25 governor's recommendation. The governor recommends a budget to the legislature every single year. And we can accept any part of it, we can modify it, we can deny pieces of it. So that number is just letting you know this is what the governor recommended, but those numbers are definitely not final. And when you get to the end of the year, when the appropriations budget has gone through and everything's signed, those numbers aren't really applicable. They aren't used at this point. They're there for your information. So the part you really need to pay attention to is where it says fiscal year 24 final. That is what we passed in this current budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So that's going to be the most useful column to compare with fiscal year 23. If someone's asking you, is my district receiving an increase in town aid road? You look at those two columns because those are going to be the most reliable, applicable ones. And then, like I said before, fiscal year 25, while it is final right now, it can be adjusted and it will be adjusted next year. So when you look at next year's town runs, these columns are going to be a little bit different. You'll see fiscal year 24, so you know what we passed for that year. And then you'll see fiscal year 25 original. It'll say something to that effect so that you know what we passed this year for next year. And then you'll see the governor's recommendation again, and then the final adjusted budget amount. So it'll be a little bit different, but the columns essentially work out the same. And that's it, really. I can go back. We can show you the full town runs.
So I'm going to pull up the town runs that I have provided to everyone, including the legislators and staff. So this is the document that you should have. Okay. So let's look at an example. Okay. So say I am the aide to the representative of Hebron. Okay. So basically, the other thing that I will recommend when you get this spreadsheet is to highlight the line that you want and just copy and paste it into it. It's just way less overwhelming and easier to understand. So in Hebron, we see payment in lieu of taxes. So this is all the funds that we are reimbursing due to tax exempt. And you'll see these are very small numbers, right? So compared to like Ledyard, who has a lot more non-tax exempt properties, so they're getting a higher reimbursement. This is a perfect example of how a lot of towns do not receive the motor vehicle reimbursement, right? So we see Hebron got it in fiscal year 23, but then no longer, right? We see that Middletown, though, is getting 1.45. That means that they had a much higher mill rate and we're taxing their residents much higher for motor vehicles. And now we are sort of making that more equitable. Here is where you see the municipal sharing general fund. You won't see anything in this column. You might wonder why it's blank. We basically just took a lot of the funds that were coming from this and just shifted it right to the right in the municipal stabilization and supplemental revenue. So see how it shows here in fiscal year 23, see how it's all 0, 0, 0. It's because the previous year was in this. And so we just shifted it. Okay. So it looks like they're getting like a brand new 43, but it's really not. See how it was over here before. Okay. So that's the other thing. You have to look at these kind of with like a big scope as well. So here's an example of towns that get Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan funds. Okay. So you can see the variety of amounts. Okay. So like Avon gets nothing. Bethany gets $881. Bethlehem gets 94, but then Bridgeport gets 5.6 million, right? So it's a big, big difference. Town Aid Road, this is what everyone receives. This is what all the towns are going to get to sort of maintain their roads and locally. This is the LoCIP that is bonding that Zoe talked about that has to go onto the State Bond Commission and be approved. So if your legislator is saying, well, where's my LoCIP? You want to explain to them that this has to get onto an agenda and get approved, and then it will come.
How is Town Aid Road calculated?
Well, I actually don't know the exact formula. I'm sure I can figure that out for you. But according to this, as you see, it's funded through the Special Transportation Fund, and the annual amount is unchanged. And so we put 60 million in it. I don't know the exact formula. I can find that for you, and OFA can help get us that.
Okay, just curious.
It's formula based and it's through DOT and it's based on road miles, bridge upkeep. So there's like a lot of different things that go into the actual formula.
Okay, so it's not something that is variable year on year.
Only if we change the formula.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. So moving across, this is the low SIP that we referenced, municipal grants and aid, and this is where you're going to see all the money.
Yes, so this is the large part of the town runs here. So you can see all the policy changes in this section. It's really helpful for just a simple explanation of we did X, Y, and Z this year to change education cost sharing. You'll see that $68.6 million number for fiscal year 25. That's how much extra is going to boards of education for their local public schools. The other part of that $150 million I referenced is for magnet schools, charters, vocational agriculture, open choice, other forms of schools that aren't reflected in this document. So that's what that number means. And you'll just see the other notes about how it's being phased in and how it's being phased out. So that's really useful. And I didn't mention this before, but I know we got a request in the chat for a link to the school and state finance project. It is in the presentation, so we'll make sure you get that too, and the link's right in there. You can also see in there, you can go town by town and see the history of the funding and the projected funding. We could still change that, so don't rely on that, but you can look at your own district or your rep's district and say, oh, okay, they're projected to get this much if we go according to the formula we currently have. So just wanted to note that. Yeah, I can scroll through a couple of these. But you'll essentially, if your town has a ton of students and not very much money, you're going to see a much larger number in this column than if your town is relatively small and wealthy. So I think I saw, yeah, if we look at Bridgewater here, they hardly get any education cost sharing. And right above it, we have Bridgeport, which gets a huge amount. And you can also see how the governor's recommended budget was to adhere to that increase that we had been phasing in. So it's a gradual amount. We pretty much kept that number in fiscal year 24, but then there's a bigger increase in fiscal year 25, and that's reflecting the extra money that we put into this program. Let me see. Oh, and then we have here, Brookfield, that's one of those flat funded towns. So you can see that they were projected to get a decrease because they are overfunded, but we kept it flat for now. They'll start seeing a decrease in our next biennial budget. And then adult education is over here too.
Where's school construction in this?
So school construction is not reflected in this document here. That goes through the bond bill.
In the last presentation, part of the bond bill that we had talked about, it includes school construction, although that happens in the education committee.
Yeah, so if you ever have any questions about, did that project that my district applied for, is that funded this year? You can ask me and I can go through the bond bill for you and I'll show you. I don't want to get too into that right now because that's an entire other presentation, but any school construction questions, if they're specific or you just want to know about the process, you can ask me about that. Yes.
Okay. How does magnet school districts factor into ECS? I know that they're separate, right?
Yes. So there's a separate amount of money that goes to districts if they have their own magnet schools, like say Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, I believe is one of those that's run by the Board of Education. They get funds for that. I don't think that's reflected in here.
No, it's not.
I don't believe it is. Yeah, this is to their,
That's what Jeff was talking to us about.
yeah, okay. So that doesn't show up in this part of the budget. I believe we would ask OFA to get specific numbers on that. We also have inter-district magnet schools that are a related but separate pot of money too. So that would be like your CREC or that sort of school. They also get funds, but not in this part of the town runs. You're not going to notice that. This is just the local public school districts. I will note that not all of these towns have their own individual school district. We have the regional school districts too. They still get funding as individual towns, and there's a little bit of a bonus if you're sending students to, or you're sending students to a regional school district to kind of cover that cost of sending them. So you won't see the regional school districts spaced out in here, but that is factored into each individual town if they're a part of one of those districts.
I just wanted to ask, just to piggyback off of that, the local public school funding is what you just addressed, but can you address where we would find the charter school funding?
This would be
where is that
found.
reflected?
We can get that exact list from OFA. They have all of that, but they did not include it in the town runs because that's not one of the typical pools. We can get that list and we can share it with our members.
So OFA produces this spreadsheet. Is there a way to ask to show sort of the percentage change year over year so you can compare easily? Because sometimes we get we message, we'll have these numbers, it'll show increases of X amount of dollars versus when maybe percentages might tell a better story. Now we could hand do that, but is it possible to have them sort of potentially enter a column with formulas that sort of show those year over years or no?
They won't do it.
Okay.
No, they won't do that. These are how they have been done for a very long time. We can request that, but frankly, we can do the math ourselves. And I just, not everyone wants that. And sometimes, I mean, I get what you're saying. Sometimes the percentage looks good, but sometimes the dollar amount looks good. I don't think that they would do that. We can ask, we can plug it, but I don't want to make any promises.
I know that we had sent out, these are like the updated town runs that we got, and these are like estimates and the formulas change over time. I guess the question is, how long should we know that this is like a valid document versus when we should check with you about, are there more updated numbers? Do you know
It's
how- yeah.
whatever the last version is. If I say these are the final town runs, this is what you will have for the next year. So going into this upcoming session, I will have new town runs for fiscal year 25. This is why sometimes when you talk with policy, we kind of push back and say you should encourage your legislator to really only talk about fiscal year 24 in their mailer, right? Because sometimes if we quote something in fiscal year 25, especially saying, oh, we got $20 million more for education, as Emily said, we might change that, right? It depends on the bottom line. Number one, how much money we have in the budget, but also there's a variety of things. If we change the formula, that could, so you're kind of making promises that you 2-year out promises, right? And I just kind of try to stay away from that as much as possible. And I want our legislators to understand why we are saying that. It's because we don't want them to make false promises and look bad in their district, frankly.
Thank you, because I was thinking like with the back and forth, like if we're gonna do like an e-newsletter in December now, should I say, these are still the numbers as far as we know until we do another.
Until the new
budget
fiscal
adjustment. So we
year.
don't have to keep asking this, okay, it's
Yep.
good until the next budget.
These are, yep, this is all, like, this was the last thing I got from OFA. So this is what is happening all the way through June 30th, 2024. Thank you, everyone.